Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal on this Wednesday, and boy, do we have a lot to cover on the Investigative Journal today. We got to talk about how the federal courts are going crazy with some of these rulings. We're going to get to that in a minute. Also, I'm going to talk about the California fires of hell. And we have the largest California fire blazing away in Northern California. I want to mention a little bit about that. As well as a Virginia-based imam says that America's problems can only be solved if America turns into a Muslim country. We'll get to that as well. And, one other thing, I wanted to talk about this, and I may have to dedicate a whole show, but there's been a huge toxic algae contamination in Florida, up from Naples up north, on the ocean, killing thousands and thousands of fish and sea creatures. And it's an enormous problem coming from Lake Okeechobee, and you got to know this area. I lived in Florida for a while. My first journalism job was in Naples, Florida. And it reminded me of a toxic algae bloom that's still going on in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala. And I was working years ago trying to make the world aware of what was going on in Lake Atitlan, this beautiful volcanic lake in Guatemala. And the similar cyanobacteria algae blooms that are toxic to fish, animals, and humans is going on now in the United States, and we'll get to that. But yesterday I ended my show by stating that the Jesuits are the fathers of most all satanic secret societies. And I mentioned that their maneuvers in Freemasonry can be traced, and the Jesuits are involved in Freemasonry. In fact, it created Freemasonry. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I did mention that years ago when I was in Rome in the 80s, I became aware of this story because of articles that were appearing in the French and Italian newspapers regarding a number of high-level, in fact, over 150 high-level cardinals and bishops were outed as being involved in Freemasonry, even giving their code names, and many involved in the famous P2 Lodge that brought down the Bank of Ambrosiano and the huge Vatican Bank scandal. So I became aware of it then. I didn't know much about it, but I followed it ever since. And the more information I get, the more I am convinced that the Jesuits were the masters of Freemasonry. We're going to get to that in a minute. Also, let me tell you this. One part of this, one area of discussion that always interested me, and we haven't dedicated much, but I found some information on it, is many people, especially in the Christian world, talk about the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, who triggered it. But have we really looked deeply into who Martin Luther was? And we're going to get into that in a minute because there's some startling information that he was a Rosicrucian, which means, if this information is correct, that he was involved with the Jesuits. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it doesn't change the importance of the Protestant Reformation. But it can give you an idea of who really created it and what reason did they create it for. We'll get to that in a minute, but if you want to talk about the Jesuits and the Vatican and Freemasonry, there's 3 books. I mentioned them yesterday. Secret Societies of All Ages and Countries. Just Google that. And also Google a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robeson. And also go to the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry and read that. And there's much you can read. There's 2 people you should read too. Look up Manly P. Hall. He's an occult writer that is revered by the occult and secret society, as well as H.P. Helena Blavatsky, who is a book that she wrote that we're going to talk called ISIS Unveiled, And isn't it curious? And if you understand the story of Isis and the connections between Isis and the three obelisks in Rome, England, and America, you'll understand it is very possible and almost probable and almost for 100% sure that ISIS is another Jesuit creation of terrorism. And we've done shows on that in the past. But let's get to Jesuits involved in Freemasonry. And, they introduced Catholic ceremonies, researchers say, into Freemasonry around 1735 to 1740. During this period of time, Masonic candidates were no longer received in a lodge, but in a clerical setting of Jerusalem, typifying Rome. Masonic meetings were called capitula, and a monkish language and asceticism prevailed inside Masonic lodges. Jesuit degrees, if you read the Jesuit oath and you understand Loyola and what they did, were established in Freemasonry. The rite of strict observance of Freemasonry was permeated by Jesuitical thinking. Jesuits' influence in Freemasonry is really classified as Masonic secrets, and then we hear a lot about secret societies. But not much is talked about the Jesuit influence, and that's how they get away with it, perhaps. Now, the Jesuits and the so-called Illuminati, the Vatican, employed Freemasonry as their unconscious tools. They were using people to get what they wanted. Now, we did shows years ago on Freemasonry, and I received a lot of criticism. And I tried to talk about that in a very, very logical manner. And I said, at the lower levels, in the early stages of Freemasonry, until you get up into the second, 33rd degrees, in the lower degrees of Freemasonry, they have no idea about any of this stuff. And it's done for a reason. Now, Freemasonry had been made the tools of prince and priestcraft, though occasionally the Jesuits turned the tables on the prince. Now, the Jesuits, researchers say, some, launched Masonic degrees for women in 1779, requiring Masonic women to prepare to sacrifice life for the good of the Catholic Apostolic Roman Church. There was, Jesuit Masons had some Chinese converts, even in the 1700s. They're very influential in China. Many people didn't know that. We talked about that situation in the 80s when I was there and watched all of these priests being outed as members of Freemasonry. And according to canon law, they should be excommunicated, but they never were. Now, what I mentioned earlier, I said that almost all secret societies and satanic cults are the offspring of the Jesuit cult. Now, how can I prove that? Well, it's difficult, but who is talking about this? One of the writers, H.P. Blavatsky, is revered and read by the occult. In a book on page 390 called Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky basically lets the cat out of the bag and tells us maybe the truth. And she says this on page 390, and this book is called Isis Unveiled. It was published originally in 1877 and republished in 1988 in Los Angeles, California, by the Theosophy Company. And it stated this on page 390, quote, "It is curious to note, too, that most of the bodies, secret societies, which work these sacred rites, such as the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, the Rite of Avignon, the Order of the Temple, the Fessler's Rite, the Grand Council of the Emperors of the East and West, sovereign princes of Masons, etc., etc., are nearly all the offspring of the sons, the Jesuits of Ignatius Loyola. The Baron Hunt, Chevalier Ramsay, Mr. Zindendorf, and numerous others who founded the grades in these rites worked under the instructions from the Grand General of the Jesuits." So they're telling you right there who created or who fashioned and constructed Freemasonry for a reason. They're used as their tools to get their one world government, their one world order under Rome. Now, a side note that I really wanted to talk about, which has not been talked about much over the years, is some research say that Martin Luther was a Rosicrucian, which in a sense, if that's true, he was a Freemason under the Jesuit control. And some people ask this: does this explain why William Tyndale was burned to death for translating the Bible 2 years after the Jesuit order was founded? But Martin Luther, who translated the Bible before Tyndale, never suffered death, not even any torture, these several researchers say. Did he have a deal? Did Martin Luther have a deal with the Jesuits? Did he remain a Roman Catholic till his death? Many of his beliefs were of Rome, for example, infant baptism, sinless Mary, perpetual Virgin Mary, Queen of Heaven. Luther died of sickness 12 years after the Jesuit order was established. So, I know people will disagree, and that's fine. And I'm not stating this to be fact one way or the other. I'm just putting it out on the table for you to talk about. So those of you, the scholars of Protestant Reformation, have a job, in a sense, have work to do. Did Martin Luther, for example, Martin Luther was a Catholic priest. He was the one that, in history, is basically the vanguard of the Protestant Reformation, the protest against Rome. And the question becomes, when you talk, and this was right when the Jesuits were formed, now when you understand how they operate today, they'll create an organization or a movement, like in this case, Protestant Reformation was a movement. They kind of do this. Think of, go at the top of a mountain that's covered with snow, and take a little snowball and start rolling that snowball down the mountain, and it grows and grows and grows and grows, and the snowball grows to a massive size by the time it reaches the bottom, right? And that's, in a sense, kind of how the Jesuits operate. They know how to push that snowball down the mountain, who to use, who to create, who to start the movement with so that it grows and grows and grows and grows. And in a sense, they have created the enemy or the movement they want, in a sense, to destroy that movement in the end to get their way. So let's look at it this way. Rome was seeking power back in the 1500s. The Protestant Reformation was devastating to Rome's authority, to Rome's pocketbook, to everything, because it said, look, you don't have to go to the Pope or a priest to gain absolutions or to talk to God or to be saved. All you need to do is read God's Word. And in Western civilization, that was huge. And especially with the Gutenberg press coming out, so the Bible now could be redistributed and given to many people who never had a chance to read it then. And so Rome was in trouble. And so, knowing the deviousness of the Jesuit order, did they use Martin Luther? Did they push Martin Luther out there to create the Protestant Reformation? So, in a sense, to do what? To then destroy it. How many millions were killed after they came out and stated, we do not want to support Rome? Millions were killed by the Jesuits. That's why they were formed. The political arm, the military arm, during that period of time, which hasn't changed today. Now, let me just indulge me for a minute here. I'm going to get off the subject. I'll get back to this in a second. But think about Donald Trump right now. Now, don't think of him in terms of, the Republicans and the Democrats are constantly fighting. Think of it in terms as they work together. Now, why would Trump, or why, we know that he was pushed into that position, and we know who pushed him there. But what reason? America has to be toppled before there can be a one world government, a one world order. It can't exist without America being toppled. What is the best way to do that? Think about this. Put a guy out there like Trump, who is now mobilizing all of these Americans who believe in their country, who want to see closed borders, who want to see America prosper, who want to fight against the globalists in Europe, who want to fight against the terrorists in the Middle East. And it's, in a sense, isolating America. And secondly, isolating those half of the population here who are supporting Trump now. He is bringing them out into the open. Now, the other half, the supporters on the left, are fighting these people tooth and nail. We're seeing more and more of this going on. Just recently, there has been violence all over the place with the left wing, stating, even Congress people are stating this: do not allow Trump, the Trump cabinet people, to go have dinner. Confront them at every step. Confront those conservatives at every step. So they're creating a violent situation. But Trump is there to bring these people out in the open, just like maybe Martin Luther brought the Protestant Reformation out in the open, the people, so that what? We know the enemy now. We know who we need to destroy. And do you think that the half of America that believes in nationalism is going to defeat the world? No way. But Trump is doing his job. He's bringing, just like maybe Martin Luther did. Now, that is just a theory. There are facts that can support it. Look at Martin Luther, where he came from. Look at Trump, where he came from, Jesuit trained. And then put it out on the table and let's try to find out the truth behind that. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? Because I'm not saying that this is, number one, the truth. But I'm saying it needs to be discussed. And I hear very little discussion about either of those subjects. I hear very little discussion regarding the Jesuits and, their deviousness and their treachery and their control of secret societies. And Blavatsky, and I'll use the last few minutes here, H.P. Blavatsky, her writing in ISIS Unveiled, in 1888, was it? And then republished in 1988. On page 399, we talked about page 390, Blavatsky writes about the Black Pope's secret arts. We've talked years about who the Jesuit general is and his importance. And look at what we have now. We have not only a Jesuit general, we have a Jesuit pope. They got the white pope and the black pope. But here's what she said. And bear with me here, because those of you who look to the East for answers, think about this. Spiritual answers from the East. Think about this. Now, this is Blavatsky, one of their own writing, and she says, it appears that the Reverend Fathers of the Order of the Jesuits have picked up many of such tricks in their missionary travels all over the world. Mr. Baldinger gives them full credit for it. The word T-S-C-H-A-M-P-I-N-G, a Hindu word, from which the modern word S-H-A-M-P-O-O-I-N-G is derived, shampooing, is a well-known magical manipulation in the East Indies. The native sorcerers used it with success to the present day, and it is from them that the Father Jesuits derive their wisdom. Camarius narrates that once upon a time there existed a great rivalry of miracles between the Austin friars and the Jesuits. A disputation having taken place between the Father General of the Austin friars, who was a very learned man, and the General of the Jesuits, who was a very unlearned man, but full of magical knowledge. The latter proposed to settle the question by trying their subordinates and finding out which of them would be the readiest to obey his superiors. Thereupon, turning to one of his Jesuits, he said, "Brother Mark, our companions are cold. I command you, in virtue of the holy obedience you have sworn to me, to bring here instantly out of the kitchen fire and in your hands some burning coals, that they may warm themselves over your hands." Father Mark instantly obeyed and brought in both his hands a supply of red burning coals and held them till the company present had all warmed themselves, after which he took them back to the kitchen hearth. The general of the Austin Friars found himself crestfallen, for none of his subordinates would obey him so far as that. The triumph of the Jesuits was then accomplished. So what am I getting at? The secret order, the Jesuit oath, their instructions, how they operate, they will put burning coals in their hands and hold them till their hands burn off, if they are instructed to do it. They have not changed to this day. The only thing that's changed is that nobody really knows about it. Many more people back then did. And the reason is because propaganda runs rampant in America and in the whole world. I'll be honest with you, when I was in Italy, I knew more. Once I started to catch on to this, and it was probably the last year before I left. Because when I first got there, I was dumb as a doornail regarding the Vatican and what they really were all about. And in fact, I have to admit, I was even there when I was an atheist at the time. And I came there and I saw this beautiful Vatican, and I said, I was born a Catholic, maybe I'll get closer to the church. Boy, I'll tell you, it went completely opposite for me. But during those first years, I had no idea. And I started to learn when that Vatican scandal came in 1982, I believe, or maybe a little bit before that. And I think when I finally left, maybe the year before I left, I started to figure them out a bit. And it led me to all the things I do today. But I did find in that last year, and even through the people I've kept in touch with in Europe, is that many more people there understood this story because their history had not been taken away from them like America. I found America to be the most ignorant of all people when it comes to this subject. And a close second is, of course, Catholic Latin America. Thirdly, so what difference does it make if all these people in Italy knew and the Vatican is there doing business? I guess it doesn't make any difference, right? Because right in that, Rome, the city of Rome, sits this country, the seat of evil, allowed to function and allowed to spread its evil throughout the world. Now, if Italians could do anything, Rome, the Vatican wouldn't be there, right? So it's a learning process. Everything I just said in this show, this half hour, please don't take it as true fact. I want you to research it, look at it. And the real issue I've always had is it never gets on the table of discussion. And before it does, those who try to bring it there are labeled as crazy, nuts. Oh, they'll go back to a story I did about aliens and they'll say, look, he's out of his mind to talk about the Jesuits that way. They'll try to marginalize you. But that's normal when you start talking about the truth. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this Wednesday, and I want to get to those stories I mentioned at the top of the hour when I started my show, before I got into the discussion of the Jesuits and Freemasonry, as well as the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther being a Rosicrucian, possibly, things like that. And I guess if you listen to that half hour, there's a lot of people out there who've studied the Bible more than me, who've researched all of these subjects more than me, but how far deep have they gone? And all it's meant, all that half hour was meant, is for you to put these ideas on the table, and let's see what we find out in the end, and let people decide what's the truth or not. It's difficult going back in history to pinpoint everything, because as we can't go back to 9/11, and how many people now have forgotten most about what happened on that day? And that's really fading from our memory. So imagine going back to the 1500s and working our way through the information we discuss here. But I want to go back even farther in this half hour. I want to start out, I got a little time, and I want to start out with this story I read. A Virginia-based imam says, quote, "America will be a Muslim nation." Now, that doesn't surprise me that I hear that. And it got me to thinking about the shows we did about who really created Islam. And if you go back to the 600s, you'll find the Vatican hand also being right there with Muhammad. And many say that the Vatican did create Islam, created an enemy. And there's so many we did shows on the similarities between Catholicism and Islam, and it's amazing. And so today it isn't surprising that now we're seeing this push for Islam to take over the world, right? And one thing I find it interesting about Islam is people think of it in terms as moderate Islam, radical Islam, radical Muslims. There's radical people everywhere, right? But the idea of Islam, once the nation is mostly Islamic, Sharia law kicks in, and boy, your rights are gone. So if you want a country like that, go right ahead. And don't fall prey to these ideas that the only imams and Islamists here are moderates. In fact, one of the most influential, named Fethullah Gulen, who was brought over here by the Clintons in the 90s, who's now being, if you saw, we did stories about him back in the early days of his operations going on in Europe, which were not moderate at all, but were radical. In fact, in Turkey, they want him back to basically stand trial for as a traitor to his nation and bringing radical Islam there. Now, why is he protected here by all the presidents? Why doesn't Trump get rid of him? If the idea of radical Islam isn't here for a reason, to take over what's going on in this country today. I mean, Gulen is a perfect example. He's been given millions of dollars by our taxpayers. He starts all these schools all over the place in the country, protected by our president. For what reason? And he claims to be a moderate, but he's not a moderate. And if you look at his work, I was doing stories about this guy years ago before we were discussing him here in America. And his influence in Scandinavian countries, his influence all over the place in Europe, Turkey as well. And he's by no means a moderate, but he's allowed to live here. He lives in a mansion in the Pocono Mountains, protected. He's billions of dollars, millions of taxpayer money to support his supposed moderate Muslim schools, but no one talks about it. And that gives me the reason to say that the Democrats and Republicans are all one and the same, controlled by the Jesuit Vatican New World Order. Now, I'm not surprised that this imam said that, because Muslims everywhere want every nation to become a Muslim nation. And what happens when they have a majority of Muslims in their country? Sharia law kicks in. Just ask some of the people that live in Europe now when they go to certain neighborhoods that are no-go zones, and people of Western heritage can't go in there. And they don't follow the laws of the country they're in, Sweden, Norway, England, to name a few, but they follow Sharia law. And this guy, his name is Suleman, Jalloh, is just a bit more straightforward about telling you what the intentions of people like Gulen and others are, although they don't mention his name. But what he has enunciated here is an Islamic imperative. If American authorities don't think the same thing is being preached in mosques all over the country, they know it is. They're in for a surprise if they don't know. And it's a taboo subject. Because what? Oh, freedom of religion. Right, but why do Muslims take advantage of freedom of religion here now, but want to overthrow that freedom if they gain power? Well, ask yourself the same thing back in when the Vatican came here first, when the Catholics first came here, because they weren't allowed to hold office, but they got into this country through freedom of religion and the Constitution that they helped manufacture. And why do they, once they get into this country and take power, want to now overthrow that very basic freedom? Because their original intentions were never good to begin with. Let's listen to this Virginia imam as he speaks. It's only about a minute. See what he has to say.
Just to help the needy people of all kinds of means. That is why Islam is only solution to solve America's problems. Islam will be the solution to solve the world's problems. Do you know why people are not implementing Islam as the solution? Find one Muslim country that has implemented Islam to solve all the problems of the Muslim country. Not one can be an example of how Islam solves all of life's problems. That's the problem we have, brothers and sisters. We are not going to absolve ourselves from this. We need to show people the way the Prophet ﷺ showed people. Islam spread not because any of us spread it, because Allah spread it. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they went through all corners of the world and they were successful just by trading with people, bartering with people, and showing them the adl of Islam. Not by the sword. You cannot compel people. La ikraha fi din, qad tabayyana ar-rushdu min al-ghayy. This is what Allah said. America has great potential. I strongly believe, inshallah, it will be a Muslim nation and potentially one of the best Muslim nations that you will see in a long time. Because there are a lot of people with good hearts, and when they embrace this deen and they taste this sweetness, they're going to make better policies that help everyone, inshallah.
Okay, so there you have it. He's giving you a big line of BS, basically, and if you look at that little statement he made about Islam doesn't believe in the sword, read the history of Muhammad and read really what's going on. And I recommend you do some research like we've done on this show into who really created Islam, how that story occurred. And like I said, the farther you go back in history, the harder it really is to prove. But I think what you have to do is put as many facts on the table and explore as many possibilities as possible to try and weave together this really interesting history that this world offers. And to look at it through the eyes of just your history books in college or through what you hear on the internet, through what you hear from the mainstream news, is a mistake. You've got to go deeper, even deeper than the scholars, I put that in quotes, tell you. Don't take anybody's word for it. Research on your own. And can you imagine what we could really find out about the really important issues that face us and have faced the world for many thousands of years? But anyway, look out for those moderate Muslims. Don't believe a word that Fethullah Gulen, remember that name, says. Okay, I just promised I'd get to the California fires of hell. And thanks, oh, by the way, Barack Obama would love to see this country turn into a Muslim country, because that was his intention. That's why he propped up Iran, and other, just follow Barack Obama. Interesting. Well, anyway, an article appeared before my very eyes here, and the fires of hell have really descended on California. And you're not going to, don't thank climate change, because that is a hoax. Thank the environmentalists and the way that we've managed our forests over the years. And Obama has a lot to do with this. What, Trump, where are you? Come on, change these things. He's talking about doing all these great things, but yet he's burning down California, allowing it to happen, or not even admitting where the problems are coming from. And according to certain people who have looked at this story, this disaster, the largest California fire in history, which is still out of control up north, largest in the history of this country, in recorded history, this was, according to some people, a disaster waiting to happen and not the cause of so-called climate change. The climate's always changed. Well, what is this? People telling us, because, that's going to lead into the story I want to talk about cyanobacteria, an algae bloom in Florida, just like the one in Guatemala in Lake Atitlan. That's toxic to fish, to plants, to people. And it's going on in Florida now. Hundreds of thousands of fish and wildlife are turning up dead on the beaches from Naples, Florida, all the way up to Tampa. And this was a product of the Army Corps of Engineers, not so-called climate change. And this disaster going on right now in California has got to be understood. Americans, you most of us people have no clue. They'll say, oh, climate change caused this. We could have, what about calling it one of the legacies of the Obama administration? Diseases are one thing devastating the forest. It's the worst of both worlds. Small fires are not allowed to burn anymore, allowing forests to rejuvenate with new growth and browse necessary to sustain animal life. Appropriate logging. So environmentalists are stopping all this logging, and has been stopped, and severely curtailing the limiting barriers to these hellish fires. Hotter, drier, longer forest fires we're witnessing today have nothing to do with the dangerous so-called man-made climate change. That's a theory you got to look at. They have a lot to do more with idiotic forest mismanagement policies and practices put into place and not changed by so-called Mr. America and Mr. Trump. The New York Times reported this in the past, just recently, on California wildfires, stating that since 2012, according to state emergency management officials, there has not been a month without a wildfire burning. A stark contrast to previous decades when fire officials saw the fall and winter as a time to plan and regroup. Now we've got people coming over from Australia, from New Zealand to help fight these fires because they're enormous. But as California burns to the ground, many Californians have been asking, why has there been a dramatic increase in these wildfires? Many will just dismiss and say climate change. Oh, too much fossil fuels in the air. We're destroying the climate. Get rid of people and you'll have fine. But what, no people. Okay. Except for Governor Jerry Brown. Brown claims the devastating fires are the new normal. He's saying, this is your governor, saying, this is the way it's going to be, folks. There's nothing you can do about it. Build a house, watch it burn down, you're just going to have to build it again. Now, if you supported these recent regulations having resulted in the new normal, it's going to be an endless devastating fire season, but that's what they do. Under Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack, this was Obama's, the Obama administration finalized a rule governing the management of 193 million acres of national forests and grasslands, established a new blueprint to guide everything from logging to recreation and renewable energy development. The Washington Post reported in 2012, the rule will serve as the guiding document for individual forest plans, which spell out exactly how these lands can be used. Well, how are you going to use them if they burn them down? And that's what's happening because of these regulations. These Obama-era regulations introduced excessive layers of bureaucracy that blocked proper forest management and increased environmentalist litigation and costs. As a result of far too many radical environmentalists, bureaucrats, leftist politicians, and judicial activists who would rather let forests burn than let anyone thin out overgrown trees or let professional loggers harvest unusable timber left from beetle infestation or selectively cut timber. It makes no sense. This is what they do. They tell you in the name of environmental protection, we're going to save the forests, but they forget to tell you that if you don't log in certain areas, if you don't allow these companies to go in and use the usable timber left over from beetle infestation and others, these are going to burn down. So what kind of solution is that? In 2016, Paul Dreesen explained it this way. He explained this in a town hall meeting, a column from his, I think it's the website Town Hall. He said eco-purists want no cutting, no thinning, no using fire retardants in sensitive areas because the chemicals might get into the streams that will be boiled away by conflagrations, by fires. They prevent homeowners from clearing brush around their homes because it might provide cover or habitat for endangered species. So what they're doing is saying, you can't clean that up because an endangered species wants to live there, but they're going to get incinerated when the fires come. They pray, they rarely alter the policies during drought years. They don't do anything. During the drought years, it's worse. The resulting fires are not forest rejuvenating blazes of environmentalist lore. They are cauldron-hot conflagrations that exterminate wildlife habitats, roast bald eagles and spotted owls, fledglings alive in their nests, boil away trout and trout streams, leave surviving animals to starve, and incinerate every living organism in already thin soils, and they get washed away during future downpours and snowmelts. Areas incinerated by such fires don't recover their biodiversity for decades. They're destroying the planet, if you want to call it a planet. Some people call it a flat surface. You got to understand how these people operate. They tell you they're doing something good, but they're actually destroying all these beautiful animals and forests. Sure, you're going to have controlled burns. Why? No more controlled burns. No more logging. Oh boy, the environmentalists coming. We can't cut that tree down, but you know what? Who cares? It's going to burn. They don't tell you that 5 years later the whole damn forest is going to burn down. But that's okay. Because you know what they'll do then? They're going to blame it on climate change and you. They're not going to blame themselves. They're going to blame you. And then they're going to tax you to death. And in the end, they get what they want. In California recently, there was a fire whirl. That's not uncommon in fires. If, what it causes is a swirl, kind of like a tornado because of the extensive heat. But in this case, there was one that was off the charts. Never had any of these firefighters seen anything like it. Over 150 miles. That's like a huge tornado. But you know what? That's a hot puppy. 145 mile an hour winds swirling with fire. I mean, come on. That is what you call hell on earth. And guess what? That's exactly what these Satanists want. They want to kill, destroy, burn whatever they can because they're not happy until it all gets burned down. Until every last one of you. What do you think they got all those FEMA coffins for? You've read the stories about them. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of coffins piled up in FEMA camps all over the country and nobody cares. What are they? Who do you think's going to go in those? It ain't going to be them, because they'll be hidden away underneath the Denver airport or something. You can bet. They're waiting just for you. And they're not even wooden, they're little plastic things. Add injury to insult. You live a beautiful life, you're an environmentalist, and you're going to put you in a plastic coffin. How does that make you feel? Okay, you people up there stay safe. All right, I'm going to start this story today. I can't finish it, but it really strikes home because, let me just tell you, both places I know very well. There's a huge algae bloom killing, look at the pictures and the videos in Naples, Florida right now, going up from Naples all the way up the coast, inland by Lake Okeechobee. And if you know the Florida area, what's happening is because of, one reason, possibly mismanagement of the waterways by the Army Corps of Engineers, causing catastrophic problems that could be solved if we dedicated the right amount of money and energy to clean up our wastewater. The same things had happened in 2009 when I got onto the story in Lake Atitlan up in Guatemala, a beautiful volcanic lake surrounded by 3 or 4 big towns that are dumping all their sewage into the lake. And what it's caused is what's called a cyanobacteria algae green bloom that kills and cuts off the oxygen of all the fish and the living creatures in the ocean. What it also does, it contaminates them, and it's toxic and deadly to people. So it can kill a community, which it's doing. The last huge bloom in 2016 was the worst at Atitlan since 2009. And now you get the huge algae bloom from wastewater, mismanaged, partially, in Florida. The same thing going on there. It's a major crisis right now. Over 100 miles of dead marine life. And in this case, let's just look at, for a minute here or two, what ABC News said about it. Okay? You don't hear about it on much on the major channels. This was a local ABC News channel. Here we go.
Environmental disaster plaguing more than 100 miles of American coastline, even making it hard to breathe in some cases. It's destroying marine life, local businesses, and family vacations. Here's ABC's Victor Okendo.
This is what a marine disaster looks like. Beaches littered with dead fish, manatees, even a whale shark washing ashore.
I've been here 20 years, and this is probably the worst I've ever seen.
100 plus miles of coastline from Naples to Sarasota, ravaged by what's called the red tide. Residents and tourists hitting some of Florida's main beaches suffering too. This family cutting their vacation short in Sarasota.
It was horrendous. There was hundreds of dead fish in the water, on the shoreline. It smelled.
The red tide is a naturally occurring event, but mankind is making it worse. Runoff from large farms and businesses feed the algae in Central Florida's Lake Okeechobee. Because of fears of dam breaks, the federal government is forced to send that algae-clogged water down rivers toward the coast.
Okay, I got to end it there. That's the local version you're going to get from the mainstream. There's a whole other version that I'm going to give you tomorrow. And we're also going to take a trip back to Lake Atitlan and talk about what's still going on there. I remember in 2009, I was trying to raise awareness of this problem, which was like pulling teeth anywhere else in the world. And of course, Guatemala doesn't have the money to even take care of its sewage systems there. And it would be a simple fix if the money was spent properly. And you can ask the native fishermen that too. And apparently the worst bloom since 2009 has occurred again in 2016. So we're seeing these cyanobacteria algae blooms killing thousands of fish now in Naples up to Tampa, Florida. Fish, sharks, manatee, etc. And we're going to talk more about what could be done and what has been done to really accelerate that problem. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.